and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Jim. Today we're going to do a deep dive on operational risk management. This episode is brought to you by Point 6 Merino Wool. I legitimately wear those socks all the time, especially on ruck marches. It's become one of my favorite activities where I throw on a heavy backpack and I walk as fast as I can, as far as I can. It's a good way to burn down calories, which I need. And I do it in a very hot, very sweaty environment. And I find that those socks actually work. So Point 6 Merino Wool, point6.com. Check them out. We've got a discount code, TACTangents 2019. So risk management. I hijacked this episode from Mike because it's a term that I use all the time, and I think it's time to do a deep dive. It's time to really get into the fundamentals of what I mean by that and the core ideas that drive Tactical Tangents as a project. Now, risk management is part of the fabric of everything we do in the military and law enforcement and civilian concealed carry. Presumably, if you have a job to do, there are risks involved in the job you have to do, and it's on you to figure out what you're going to do about them. So it underpins everything we do. It's how we decide what equipment is worth buying. It's how we decide how we evaluate one tactic over another, or when we're going to tweak a tactic in order to dial down our risk somewhere. It also drives what scenarios we're training against. What problem are you trying to build your training around? So we need to understand it. We need to consciously bring it into our decision cycle. The problem is that, like a lot of things in the tactical world, this has been distorted by trainers and regulations, and it's become a box that you check, or a reflective belt that you wear, or a form that you fill out. And that's not the point, right? So this podcast is not a safety briefing. I'm not going to push up my glasses on my nose and tell you, okay, guys, safety is really important, because safety, though it is important, is not job one. It's not our mission. Your mission is whatever your mission is. It's to go deliver ordnance on target on time. It's to make a tasty burger. It's to enforce the law, despite the fact there are people who perhaps don't want the law enforced on them. It is to make it to Walmart and buy diapers for your kid at 10 o'clock at night and make it through the parking lot without getting harassed. It is all of those things, and we got to figure it out, and we got to get it right, because otherwise, what's the point? We have to understand safety is not a switch on a gun. It's not the reflective belt. It's not the safety office down the hall. It is this very real effort to make it home safe in a world that is inherently risky. Now, understanding that, you can be pretty safe and you can dial down your risk a lot if you just stay home, right? But that's not the point. You've got to be able to get out and do your thing. It just needs to kind of operate in the background of everything we do. So safety isn't first, safety isn't second. Usually safety comes like third, and that's okay. And we can be honest and comfortable with that. Just as a little bit of background, where I started really thinking about this safety and risk management thing, and I've been taught a lot of random things in the Air Force, a lot of acronyms and cycles and checklists and procedures and abbreviations, and a lot of them are just ridiculous. It's some guy trying to get another stripe or another star or whatever. But risk management and crew resource management and the OODA loop, those three things have always stood out to me as worthwhile. It wasn't always that way with risk management. It used to be just another safety briefing. And in fact, it was in one of those just another safety briefings where a guy back in the day was talking about, it sounds so silly, CD cases. So for those of you who are not quite as old as I am, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we had these discs that had music on them, compact discs, right? And you would carry them around in packs of these CDs. So CD case had 30 or 60 of them in there, and often you'd drive with it, and people frequently put them in the passenger seat of the car, and then at like stoplight, you'd throw a new CD into the CD player, which is great until you hit a bump or a turn or hit your brakes, and the CD case falls down into the floor. And this is a this is a thing that just this guy was talking about in the context of the safety briefing. He said, I didn't really think about it until I started thinking about risk management and what is it costing me if I lean over and pick it up while I'm driving? And what's it worth to me? Is picking up my CD case off the floor of the car, or my cell phone nowadays off the floor of the car, is that worth getting in a wreck? And it was that balancing act, is the juice worth the squeeze here thing. And I'm going to talk about that throughout. Learning how to balance risk and reward. And it created kind of a light bulb moment for me. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I need to be good at that. If I'm going to be a good military decision maker, I've got to know how to balance risk and reward. And I've got to know how to maybe dial down the risk and dial up the reward. And that's the whole point of the operational art and strategy. And where I really started thinking about it was I had kind of a lull in my military training, and Mike and I were kind of bored, and we wanted to do something, give something back to a program we both grew up in. So we built a survival school for Civil Air Patrol cadets. And, if you picture like a traditional survival school, it's built around a scenario, like you're stranded on a desert island or you're lost in the woods. And I started thinking, and this was, 2005-ish, I started thinking, like, how many people nowadays get lost in the woods? Does that happen that much now that we have cell phones and GPSs and stuff? And it's always possible. And there are people to this day who still get lost in the woods, but it is not nearly as frequent as it was once, right? And how often are people getting stranded on desert islands? It's pretty rare. Pretty rare. It did happen back in like World War I, World War II era when ships would get, torpedoed. It's not really happening anymore, right? We're probably going to find you. And so I started Googling statistics on what actually kills teenagers and young adults. And it turns out getting stranded in the forest, not very common. Getting stranded on a desert island, not very common. What was killing late teens, early adults was things like interpersonal violence, drownings, accidental drownings, and car wrecks. So, what would a survival school look like if you built it around those things? And that's what we tried to do when we built the syllabus for our survival school. And it turned into an interesting project, and it was one of the inspirations for what became Tactical Tangents. And it all started with that, let's take a sober look at what is really injuring and killing people, and let's do something about it. I want to take a second to talk about Manus X. Manus X is a company that makes a little widget, goes on your gun, and you can use it for dry fire training. You can also use it for live fire, but I mostly use it for dry fire, and it gives you data and statistics on how you're doing. When you think about, depending on what stage of your life you're in, sometimes it's really hard to take 6 or 8 hours, get out to a shooting range. Sometimes it's hard to get to them, depending on where you live, and really get out and shoot. And when you can't do that all the time, what you have to do is deliberate practice and dry fire. And dry fire is good, and you should be doing it. And one of the ways you get high-quality deliberate practice is you have a coach. Well, that's not always feasible, so this is the next best thing. You stick this on your gun, it takes a lot of data, and it tells you how long it takes to draw the weapon and pull the trigger from the beep. It can run you through different scenarios and different drills, and it is absolutely worth checking out. Mantis X. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the fundamentals of operational risk management. And in this context, I'm talking about formal, capital, operational risk management. So kind of the military term and traditional doctrinal term. So to define it, I define it as the sum of our efforts to understand and either prevent or reduce the hazards of doing business. Like I said, the military has this pretty well-developed process model for risk management. It would be silly not to steal it. So how do we incorporate it into what we do? I like to think of it as kind of an OODA cycle in and of itself, but you could also build it into your OODA cycle, your observation, orientation, decision, action, OODA cycle, which we've talked about in the past. You can incorporate this into orientation. How do you perceive the world around you? Perceive it in the context, among other things, of risks and rewards. So that's one way to think about it. You can also think about it as part of the decision component of your OODA cycle. How do I make decisions about it? What are my list of possible courses of action? And how am I going to tweak those to manage risk? So consider this cycle lives inside of your bigger decision cycle. So the traditional steps of ORM, Operational Risk Management, this 6-step process, I'm going to rattle them off a couple times just so you can get them in your brain, and then I'll explain them. Step 1, identify the hazards. Step 2, assess the hazards and their embedded risks. 3, analyze control measures. 4, make control decisions. 5, implement controls. 6, review. Again, step 1, identify the hazards. Step 2, assess the hazards and their embedded risks. Step 3, analyze control measures. Step 4, make control decisions. Step 5, implement your controls. And 6, do a review. So it should be this never-ending process where you're trying to get smarter every time as far as your risks go. So step 1, identify the hazards. Now, in this instance, we're talking about hazard as the actual injury or harm or damage or mission failure and its cause. So, for example, you could get shot, but getting shot isn't actually the hazard. It's the tissue damage. It's the bleeding to death thing or the organ damage that goes with getting shot. You could fall out of a helicopter. Falling out of the helicopter isn't the hazard. It's the sudden impact. It's the massive trauma when you hit the ground, right? And that's a little nuanced, but if you follow that logic flow, you can see how we can kind of work backwards from there to dial down the risk. So getting shot isn't so much the hazard, it's the tissue damage. So maybe there's something in between where we can make, even though you get shot, we reduce the tissue damage from, say, a Kevlar layer or a helmet. Same thing with falling out of a helicopter. Well, if the massive trauma on the ground is the problem, maybe we don't do it on asphalt if we can help it. We do it on, I don't know, big old air bladders or something. The point is that we're trying to actually reduce the harm and damage and mission failure. It's not so much the cause or mechanism that gets you there. And then once you've listed out all the things that could cause you harm and damage, you have to kind of assess both their likelihood and their severity. So what is the probability this is going to happen? And how bad will it be if it does happen? So both the odds and severity. And from the combination of probability and severity, then you get the overall risk. Step 3, analyze control measures. That's where you walk yourself through what can you do about it? What can you do to dial down either the probability or the severity? And the standard list of things you can do about it are reject it, avoid it, delay it, transfer it, spread it, compensate for it, or reduce it. So that was a little laundry list, but I'll walk you through it. So say, for example, I'm analyzing the operational risk of going to the supermarket and buying a gallon of milk. And the hazard that I'm worried about is dying in a car wreck on my way to go to the supermarket to buy a gallon of milk. Okay, well, what can I do about that? I could reject it altogether. Say, I'm not going to. I'm not going to the supermarket. It's not worth it. A gallon of milk is not worth my life. I could say that. Am I being totally reasonable? No. But it is an option. You could avoid it. You could say, I need to get that milk, but maybe driving isn't how I want to do it. Maybe instead I'm going to walk there. Now, there are risks that go with walking as opposed to driving, but that's an option. I can delay it. I can, instead of going in the middle of the night or in the middle of a thunderstorm, I could wait for the thunderstorm to pass or the sun to rise when the overall risk is lower as far as my driving goes. I could transfer the risk. Maybe I can order a grocery delivery and make it the supermarket's problem as far as how they're going to get the milk to me. I could spread my risk around. So instead of me always going to the store, maybe everyone in my family takes turns going to the store. Now, that doesn't necessarily buy down my overall risk, but it dials down the risk for any one person getting hurt. I could compensate for that risk. I could wear a helmet while I'm driving to the store. Or I could reduce my risk by, for example, going less often. So instead of buying a gallon of milk, I buy 5 gallons of milk. So I'm doing the thing less frequently. And I have to consider trade-offs. Like, am I just trading one hazard for another? And are there any unintended consequences when I do that? And one of my favorite examples of that is motorcycles have some risk and the hazard of smashing your brain into the pavement is real. So we want to wear a helmet. What if I could invent a helmet that could perfectly protect you from concussion? Say it weighs 75 pounds and it costs $150,000. Is it worth it? And what are the trade-offs? Well, maybe I perfectly protected you from concussion, but now your whole head's going to come off. You're going to get decapitated, or your neck's going to get broken in the impact. Well, that doesn't work. Can I hand off the risk entirely? This goes into the transfer of risk. If you are a patrol officer and you have a barricaded suspect, you can go guns blazing in to handle the barricaded suspect. Or you could pass it off to the SWAT team, an organization that trains, equips, and organizes specifically to handle that one task. And so they have all kinds of ways they can dial down their risk and let them deal with it. So can I transfer it? And then you make an overall decision about it of which of those control measures am I going to use? Take a sober look at your overall risk and what you can really implement, and then decide overall, even with the control measures, is the juice worth the squeeze? For example, going to get a gallon of milk from the supermarket. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and accept that risk. I'm just going to drive and go get the milk. Or maybe I'll wait till daylight. I don't have to go at midnight. And then actually do the thing. Implement your controls. Go do the mission and do the things you said you would do to dial down your risk. And then once you've done that, do a review. After the fact, do a hot wash and figure out what you're going to change for next time so that you don't have as much risk every successive time you do the thing. So that's ORM. Identify the hazards, assess the risks and their embedded hazards, analyze your control measures, make control decisions, implement your controls, and review. Now, this process can either be planned or hasty. If you got the time, take the time. If I'm planning a big event, the Super Bowl, the Rose Parade, Boston Marathon, those are events that have real risk. And I want to sit down and really run this process. And it doesn't have to be anything that big. It could just be, I'm running a police academy every 6 months. But that's what I do. And I know it. And I know 6 months out, I'm going to be running a police academy. Well, let's sit down and let's think about all the things that could go wrong. Right? So it starts with drawing out the plan. Know the timeline, know the map, and you can sometimes see on a map where the hazards are. It's sometimes a literal geographic hazard. You're on a cliff, you're next to a raging river or whatever. Keep a running brainstorm of the hazards and the contingencies. Contingencies aren't the hazard, they're the things that will change the game on you or change your decision making. And from there, build up your list of triggers and minimum requirements. So if I'm doing this planning, I say, well, I know that at minimum, I need an ambulance on site if we're going to do this live shooting event. And if the ambulance doesn't show, I'm going to cancel the event. So you have a trigger and you have a minimum requirement. Or you say, if during the shooting event, someone is injured and that takes the EMTs out of availability, then I'm going to shut down the event. So I have that, again, a trigger and a minimum requirement. I also want to bring friends into my planning. They're going to catch things you don't. So write it all down, bring some friends into the planning process, and then at the end, bring some friends in and present the plan to them and have them what if you. And try to come up with more contingencies and more hazards that maybe you haven't thought of. And maybe also some control measures that you haven't thought of. And if you don't have time, if you have to make a hasty risk management decision, that's okay. Maybe the building's burning, you got to go in. That's cool. Take 1 second, take a deep breath, and do a sanity check. Okay, is this what I think it is? Am I going where I think I'm going? Is this the right house? Take a minute for safety, or a second for safety if that's all you got. But do take the breath, take a minute, think about it. And there are some principles that you want to apply throughout the risk management experience. First off, you accept only necessary risks, or put another way, you accept no unnecessary risks. Right? The juice always has to be worth the squeeze. My example from this is low-level flying. In the Air Force, often we fly low to the ground. The intent is to hide from radar-guided missiles. The problem is the ground is just as capable of killing you as the missiles are, and sometimes much, much more capable. So think through and go, well, am I doing this low level because it's fun and it's challenging, or am I doing this low level because it's actually protecting me? And if so, what is it actually protecting me from? I'm not saying we shouldn't do low level. I think we should, but I think we need to be honest about what it is we are training for and against. And then fly as high as the threat will allow you to fly. And you have to make risk decisions at the right level. You got to kind of know when to bring an adult and when to put it in writing. Hey boss, do you know that we're out doing this? Do you know that we don't have body armor? Do you know that it's 105 degrees out and we don't have water? All right, so think through at what point you need to bring in the colonel, or what point you need to bring in the chief, or what point you need to bring in the sheriff, or the range manager, and say, hey, this is a real thing. I want you to be aware of it, and I want you to sign off on it. Like, yes, we're going to do this no matter what. We're going to accept this risk. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. It's a personality thing usually. One example, there was a law enforcement agency in the Southwest that had a radio problem. There were big dead spots where the radios weren't working because of the geography and topography of their service area. And so it was interesting to see the sheriff of that county knew. And I'm not going to go through all the things he did to mitigate that risk, but just some examples. You could say, hey, I'm the sheriff. I know that this is a problem. I know it's going to take a couple fiscal years to fix it. Maybe if you're going to go into these areas by policy, I want you to always have a backup. You're always, as a default, always going to call for a second unit. Or maybe we're going to start sending someone your way, whether they actually go there or not, so they can act as a radio relay, something like that. But you get that by elevating, right? And you have to know what risk decisions you can make at your level. And that's important. And that's an important part of leadership, is knowing what decisions you can make at your level. And if you're a leader, you need to know which risk decisions you're letting your guys make on your behalf. So to figure out how to apply this, I like to use a scenario. This is like standard scenario number 1 for risk management. I like to do a mundane one, which is, let's plan a drive from Phoenix to Los Angeles. Well, we start out by saying, well, what could go wrong? Well, I could die in a fiery explosion car crash. Okay, well, that would be pretty severe. How often does that happen on drives from Phoenix to LA? 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, 1 in 5 million. It doesn't happen very often. Okay, how severe is that? Pretty darn severe. Okay, so I want to do something to dial that down. Maybe that's check my brakes before I start the drive. Maybe that's make sure that I am well rested before I start the drive so I don't fall asleep at the wheel. Maybe that's do a maintenance check on the car and make sure that all of the systems work the way they're supposed to, like the turn signals and the headlights. Maybe it's drive the speed limit. Maybe it's drive 10 miles under the speed limit if you're that type of person. Maybe I can reject it, maybe or transfer it or avoid it and fly instead. Could I fly from Phoenix to LA? Yeah, lots of people do that. Okay. What other hazards? My car could break down and I could get stuck on the side of the road. I don't like that because that would ruin my travel plans. Okay. What can I do to make sure that doesn't happen? Well, I could drive in daylight. I could, again, check the maintenance of my vehicle. I could belong to AAA so that even if I do break down, I've got some sort of rescue capacity where I can call AAA and have them come tow me. That doesn't keep me from breaking down, but it keeps me from getting stuck. So think through that, and we'll come back to the driving from Phoenix to LA example. I want to take a second and talk about Ride-On Optics. Ride-On Optics makes good glass. That's their specialty, is good rifle scopes and good binoculars. And there are a lot of scope makers out there that have earned their place in the market. I would offer that Ride-On is fighting to earn its place in the market and has done a good job. They've literally put their money where their mouth is as far as supporting veterans and law enforcement. I have been impressed by every piece of equipment I've seen from them. and they're worth checking out. And it might be time to break away from the rest of the herd and check out Ride-On. So let's talk about the gotchas. And there are a lot of gotchas when it comes to risk management. It's easy to get yourself down a rabbit hole of bad decision making justified by risk management. So that's not a win. You have to make good decisions that are supported by good risk management. And I think the core of the problems with risk management and how we apply it is that our little ape brains are just bad at it. We are evolved to distort and magnify some risks over others. And I didn't really figure out how to explain this until I read a book by a guy named Michael Shermer. He wrote the book, Why People Believe Weird Things, where he explains things like conspiracy theories and myths like vaccines causing autism, and he explores how even very smart people can kind of delude themselves. It turns out that has a lot to do with risk. So picture back in caveman times. If you heard rustling in the bushes, well, that could be a breeze or it could be a tiger. In the absence of more information, the cavemen who assumed there was some evil lurking in the bushes and bolted tended to live longer than the ones who didn't. So we kind of developed this suspicion based on agency. And when I say agency, I mean like someone out there with intent. I don't mean like an organization. So we tend to magnify risk when it involves someone trying to harm us. But in the 21st century, that evolved risk management construct kind of gets us in trouble. For example, I think law enforcement officers tend to, and I'm not a cop, but I know a lot of cops and I watch a lot of cops, and I've heard a lot of Mike's stories. I think law enforcement officers tend to focus a little bit more on the threat of getting shot than the threat of a car wreck or getting hit by a car while on a traffic stop. Now, there's some data to support that. If you go to the Officer Down Memorial page, you'll see that at least in 2018, the most recent data that we have, there were more officers shot and killed than killed in car wrecks, but there was still a substantial number killed in car wrecks, enough that we shouldn't be discounting that. And there were 6 that were struck by cars. And we also need to acknowledge that 18 died of heart attacks. Gosh, statistics, man. Now, that's just a snapshot. That's just 2018 in the United States, and that's just one source, Officer Down Memorial page, but it kind of puts it in context that you need to think about getting shot, but you also need to think about car safety. You also need to think about heart disease, it turns out. Now, in a military context, are you more likely to roll a military vehicle or get struck by an IED? In a concealed carry context, are you more likely to get shot or more likely to get in a car wreck? Again, that car wreck thing keeps coming up. In a survival prepper context, are you more likely to die from the end of the world type scenario or from like heart disease and type 2 diabetes? And my experience as a prepper is, and being surrounded by a lot of people who are preppers, is they need to worry a little bit more about the type 2 diabetes risk. You don't do the enemy's job for them by killing yourself. So how do we fight this? We fight this by really fighting to understand the statistics. Go find them. Go to the FBI website. Go to the Officer Down Memorial page website. And some of these stats are hard to find. Sometimes they're hard to interpret. Sometimes they're easy to distort, but you got to at least try. And there are 2 statistical factors that I need you to consider. Understand that big numbers are also hard for our little ape brains. So if I say there's a 1 in a million shot that something's going to go wrong, that's a pretty comfortable odds. That's most people would accept, 1 in a million, oh yeah, I'll take those risks. That's cool until you multiply that risk by 1 million people doing the same thing, like at an organizational level. And the example I use from this is shooting ranges. In the military shooting range manuals, we assume that given what we know about bullets and how far they travel and how far they ricochet, we've done a bunch of modeling that says, we know an M4 will travel so many meters, or M4 bullet, will travel so many meters. And from that, we can build a surface danger zone, a bat wing or a bug splat style danger zone. And we know when we're building the range that we don't want to build any roads inside of that danger zone. We don't want buildings or structures. We don't want people to freely move inside that danger zone. And we know that outside of that danger zone, we're good. We can build roads or buildings, whatever. And the modeling assumes 1 in a million, as in, like, if I shoot 1 million rounds, only one is going to escape that danger zone shape. Okay, well, on a big Army shooting range, I might shoot 5 million rounds a year. So how many rounds are going to leave that danger zone? Well, I can't guarantee 5 will, but often it'll be about 5. So 5 a year, let's say, are going to land outside, and they're going to land on a road, or they're going to land in a building. And some big decision maker in the Army said, yep, I'm going to accept that risk. Now multiply that 5 million a year times 50 years. Or 5 rounds escaping per year times 50 years. Now you've got a much bigger number. So understand, when I multiply these 1 in a million or 1 in 100,000 type risks, those become real numbers again. You also have to understand, again, that multiplied risk thing as far as cumulative risk across a career. If you're a cop and there's a 1 in 10 chance that guy has a real gun instead of a toy gun, let's say, well, your goal isn't just to survive that one engagement. Say it's 1 in 10 chance. I don't know that. But you have to keep surviving engagements from the first day of your career through the last day of your career. So 20 years, 25 years, whatever. I do not expect a cop to accept that 1 in 10 risk 10 times or 100 times, because those odds are going to catch up with you, right? That's bad risk management if we expect cops to do that. And I think law enforcement agencies would help their case if they explain that a little bit. We also need to consider in the gotchas for ORM that we tend to recruit and groom and train risk-comfortable people. We've talked about this in the personality episode, that we, the military, we law enforcement, we the concealed carry world, we tend to have people who are comfortable with the fact that they are working in an environment where there are hazards. And those same people will tend to do a lot of gymnastics to justify a risk. They'll do things like not wear a seatbelt because they're concerned with the idea of getting stuck in their car when it's on fire or when it's taking fire. And they're more concerned with that than they are with getting in a car wreck. Well, which one do you think kills more people? So don't let people get away with that. Don't let the people you work with say, well, I've done this before and it was safe, therefore it's safe. No, that's bad risk management, right? You have to get a real sense of how often is this going to go wrong and how severe is it going to go if it goes wrong. So to wrap this up, where do we go with this? Well, first off, if there's some scenario that concerns you, take this opportunity and do a risk analysis about it. If you're a parent, are you afraid that your kid's going to get kidnapped? Well, if so, do something about it. Think through, how likely is it? How severe is it? And what are you doing to make it either less likely or less severe? Making it less likely is often a factor of supervision, right? You just got to be around your kid, or you have to have some responsible adult watching your kid. How do you make it less severe? You can teach your kid some sort of martial arts, and it doesn't even matter which one, because it's not about your kid ninjaing your way out of being kidnapped. It's about teaching them to carry themselves a little differently and to detect hostile intent better. So it doesn't even matter, but you got to get them into some kind of a training. A lot of gun owners tend to think about the scenario of, like, what if somebody comes through my front door in the middle of the night? Kind of a home invasion robbery scenario. Well, that's cool, and maybe that inspires you to go buy a gun or buy another gun or whatever. But think through, what if that scenario doesn't go the way you picture? What if instead of coming through your front door, they go through your back door, so to speak, or through your bedroom window, and they don't give you time to put your glasses on, and they don't give you time to open up your gun safe? What are you going to do about that? What are you doing to make that less likely? Maybe it's not buy another gun. Maybe it's get better security lighting around your house. Maybe it is reinforce your front and back door. Maybe it's putting security film over your windows so they can't just throw a rock through your window. And we wrote an article about this. How do you manage your risk against burglary and robbery? If you're a survival guy or gal and you're worried about the end of the world scenario, or end of the world as we know it, Teotihuacan scenario, that's cool. Now sit down and think about what that really means. How likely is it that we're going to face, the EMP that knocks out all the electronics across the U.S. versus just the big regional disasters, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the wildfires, the stuff that actually happens, and it happens like every year roughly in most regions. What are you doing about that to make them less likely or less severe? And if you're a concealed carrier and you're worried about getting robbed at a gas station, what are you doing about it? Are you getting training? Are you going to the right gas station? Maybe pick a different gas station altogether. The best way to win a gunfight is to not get in a gunfight, right? Maybe you take a buddy to the gas station. Do I really think you should take a buddy to the gas station? Probably not. But there are definitely parts of town where I would absolutely want a buddy going to the gas station because 2 people are harder to screw with than 1. So along all those lines, I want you to consider the hazards you might be ignoring. Remember when I talked about how people can delude themselves and they kind of fixate on one hazard over the other? For example, if you look around your house and it's easy to picture the hazard of a gun left unattended, right? If a kid picks up a gun and they could hurt or kill themselves with it. Most people intuitively understand the hazard of a gun. But if you look at the statistics, what really hurts and kills kids more often is pools, hot tubs, and bathtubs. What are you doing about that if you have kids? And consider what's actually going to hurt you. Now, you might have all kinds of shooting training. You might have all kinds of tactical training. But if car wrecks are more likely to kill you, why not go get some driving training? Why not take an emergency vehicle operations course like what ambulance drivers or police might have to take? Why not get that training? If heart disease kills most Americans, what are you doing about it? Maybe your risk management for the day shouldn't be, building a new PowerPoint briefing or filling out a form on risk management. Maybe it should be eating a salad instead of a cheeseburger at lunch. And, maybe that sounds foofy or whatever, but man, dying of colon cancer sucks every bit as bad and maybe worse than getting shot. So think about the hazards and what's actually going to harm you. I also want you to take a minute for safety every day. Maybe on the drive into work, maybe while you're in the shower or in the shitter or whatever. Take 1 minute and think about what can I do today to dial down my risk? What hazard am I not preparing myself for? And think through it. Think through your drive to work. What can I do to dial down my risk on my drive to work? What can I do to dial down my risk while I'm at work? What can I do to dial down my risk while I'm coming home from work? When I go to the supermarket? And you don't have to be obsessed with it. You don't have to be obsessed with safety and risk. But again, it should be kind of the fabric of what you do. It should be part of the orientation part of your OODA loop, where you look around and you go, okay, that's something that can get me hurt. Let's fix it. So that's it. That's risk management. I appreciate your time. We publish new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. This has been an awesome project so far, and it's getting better. So keep hitting us up with your questions and comments. We love having them. We like the discussion. If I missed something and you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. We can make another podcast because risk management, it will never go away. It will always be something we talk about. So maybe we can talk through a scenario or some lesson you learned, and then we can all benefit from it because we're not going to live long enough to all make the same mistakes. Thanks and be safe out there. See ya.